The sky above Alberta cracked with a sound no one had ever heard before. Not thunder, not lightning, but something else, something wrong, like the world itself was being torn open. Sergeant Elena Voss stood outside the snow-covered communications outpost, frozen not by the cold, but by the sight overhead. Enormous black ships, sharp-edged and humming with energy, broke through the clouds like knives through silk. People across the world watched the same terrifying scene unfold. Giant alien vessels descending slowly, silently at first, and then with purpose. Cities panicked, skies darkened, power grids flickered. Elena ducked back inside the small bunker, where two other soldiers and a civilian engineer named Max stared at the cracked monitor that showed satellite feeds from across the globe. New York, Tokyo, Moscow, each had one of those ships hovering above it. "They're not just here to say, 'Hello,'" Max muttered, face pale. The alien broadcast began a minute later. The language was strange, a chorus of clicking and echoing growls, but the translation software managed to catch some meaning. The message was simple: surrender or be erased. They were called the Threxil, and they had come to claim Earth for their empire. Governments scrambled jets and missiles, but nothing reached the ships. Energy shields flared and absorbed every counterattack. In less than a day, major cities went dark. Elena's outpost, deep in the frozen wilderness, received no new orders. Communications were failing, satellites going silent one by one. "We're cut off," she said, turning to her team. "No one's coming." The snow outside thickened. Night fell early. They heard the first boom around midnight. Something heavy had landed far off in the forest. Elena ordered the lights off and scanned the tree line with binoculars. Strange figures moved there, tall and jointed like insects, glowing faintly green. In the dark, they didn't move like humans. They skittered and hovered above the snow. The cold didn't seem to bother them at first. But as the temperature dropped to -30, strange things started to happen. One of the alien scouts froze in place, literally frozen, mid-step. Another slipped and fell, its limbs flailing awkwardly. "They're not built for this," Elena whispered, her breath fogging in the air. Max nodded slowly, eyes wide. "They don't understand, Winter." That night, Elena made her decision. They weren't going to run, they were going to fight, not like soldiers in a war, but like hunters in the ice. She organized her small team into shifts, had them build traps in the snow using the environment as a weapon. Old flares, camouflage blankets, body heat sensors, they used every scrap the base had left. On the second night, the aliens came closer. One stepped into a deep snow trench and got stuck. A second followed, only to trigger a buried fuel tank wired to explode. The team watched from the hill as blue flames lit up the night sky and pieces of alien armor flew into the trees. They cheered quietly. For the first time, the fear turned into something else: hope. In the following days, as the storm grew worse, Elena and her team captured pieces of alien tech and studied them in the bunker. Their suits were designed for warm climates, their joints too delicate for freezing winds. They were advanced, yes, but not invincible. The Threxil had expected a quick victory. They hadn't prepared for the cold. The invaders tried again, sending drones and small machines to search for human survivors. The team learned how to jam the signals, confuse the drones with thermal reflections and ice mirrors. The aliens grew more cautious. Each time they landed near the outpost, something went wrong. Equipment froze, sensors failed, creatures collapsed from the frost. Elena realized the snow wasn't just hiding them, it was fighting for them. Still, they remained careful. Supplies ran low. Food had to be rationed. Sleep was rare. But no one left. No one gave up. Each morning, they awoke to more signs that the enemy was struggling. Ships covered in frost, trails of collapsed Threxil warriors, equipment abandoned in the snow. The sky still held those massive ships, casting shadows over the land, but fewer patrols came now. The aliens were adapting slowly, trying to learn. Elena knew that window wouldn't last forever. They had to act while the weather gave them the advantage. One morning, Max ran into the bunker out of breath, clutching a radio. I picked up a signal. Another outpost in Alaska. Survivors. They're doing the same thing we are. Elena listened closely. The message was weak, broken by static, but clear enough. Use the cold. Winter is on our side. She smiled for the first time in days. Maybe the world hadn't ended. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. A resistance, a fight back. The Threxil had come to conquer Earth, but they hadn't been ready for winter. The sky above Alberta cracked with a sound no one had ever heard before. Not thunder, not lightning, but something else, something wrong, like the world itself was being torn open. Sergeant Elena Voss stood outside the snow-covered communications outpost, frozen not by the cold, but by the sight overhead. Enormous black ships, sharp-edged and humming with energy, broke through the clouds like knives through silk. People across the world watched the same terrifying scene unfold. Giant alien vessels descending slowly, silently at first, and then with purpose. Cities panicked, skies darkened, power grids flickered. Elena ducked back inside the small bunker, where two other soldiers and a civilian engineer named Max stared at the cracked monitor that showed satellite feeds from across the globe. New York, Tokyo, Moscow, each had one of those ships hovering above it. "They're not just here to say hello," Max muttered, face pale. The alien broadcast began a minute later. The language was strange, a chorus of clicking and echoing growls, but the translation software managed to catch some meaning. The message was simple: surrender or be erased. They were called the Threxil, and they had come to claim Earth for their empire. Governments scrambled jets and missiles, but nothing reached the ships. Energy shields flared and absorbed every counterattack. In less than a day, major cities went dark. Elena's outpost, deep in the frozen wilderness, received no new orders. Communications were failing, satellites going silent one by one. "We're cut off," she said, turning to her team. "No one's coming." The snow outside thickened. Night fell early. They heard the first boom around midnight. Something heavy had landed far off in the forest. Elena ordered the lights off and scanned the tree line with binoculars. Strange figures moved there, tall and jointed like insects, glowing faintly green. In the dark, they didn't move like humans. They skittered and hovered above the snow. The cold didn't seem to bother them at first. But as the temperature dropped to -30, strange things started to happen. One of the alien scouts froze in place, literally frozen, mid-step. Another slipped and fell, its limbs flailing awkwardly. "They're not built for this," Elena whispered, her breath fogging in the air. Max nodded slowly, eyes wide. "They don't understand winter." That night, Elena made her decision. They weren't going to run. They were going to fight, not like soldiers in a war, but like hunters in the ice. She organized her small team into shifts, had them build traps in the snow, using the environment as a weapon. Old flares, camouflage blankets, body heat sensors. They used every scrap the base had left. On the second night, the aliens came closer. One stepped into a deep snow trench and got stuck. A second followed, only to trigger a buried fuel tank wired to explode. The team watched from the hill as blue flames lit up the night sky and pieces of alien armor flew into the trees. They cheered quietly. For the first time, the fear turned into something else: hope. In the following days, as the storm grew worse, Elena and her team captured pieces of alien tech and studied them in the bunker. Their suits were designed for warm climates, their joints too delicate for freezing winds. They were advanced, yes, but not invincible. The Threxil had expected a quick victory. They hadn't prepared for the cold. The invaders tried again, sending drones and small machines to search for human survivors. The team learned how to jam. The signals confused the drones with thermal reflections and ice mirrors. The aliens grew more cautious. Each time they landed near the outpost, something went wrong. Equipment froze, sensors failed, creatures collapsed from the frost. Elena realized the snow wasn't just hiding them, it was fighting for them. Still, they remained careful. Supplies ran low, food had to be rationed, sleep was rare. But no one left. No one gave up. Each morning they awoke to more signs that the enemy was struggling. Ships covered in frost, trails of collapsed Threxil warriors, equipment abandoned in the snow. The sky still held those massive ships, casting shadows over the land, but fewer patrols came now. The aliens were adapting slowly, trying to learn. Elena knew that winter wouldn't last forever. They had to act while the weather gave them the advantage. One morning, Max ran into the bunker out of breath, clutching a radio. I picked up a signal, another outpost in Alaska. Survivors. They're doing the same thing we are. Elena listened closely. The message was weak, broken by static, but clear enough. Use the cold. Winter is on our side. She smiled for the first time in days. Maybe the world hadn't ended. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. A resistance. A fight back. The Threxil had come to conquer Earth, but they hadn't been ready for winter. Wind howled through the trees as Sergeant Elena Voss stood on a frozen cliff, her eyes locked on the glow of the alien heat generator far below, its smooth black surface pulsing like a living thing, melting the snow around it and sending thick steam into the sky like a warning flare to the world. This was the Threxil's answer to the cold, their final plan to turn Earth's winter into something they could survive, and if it powered up fully, every advantage the Resistance had would vanish in days. Elena turned away and moved through the snow-covered forest where her team, known across the radio waves now as the Ghost Wolves, waited, their faces hidden by frost and resolve, their gear patched and worn, but their hearts steady. The mission had a name now, Operation Whiteout, and it wasn't just theirs anymore. In the days after their alliance with the alien defector Vec, Elena had helped build a loose network of resistance groups across the globe. Small units like hers in the Arctic, Siberia, the Himalayas, all sending coded messages through hidden frequencies, working in sync, fighting in silence. The plan was simple: strike every alien heat site at once, push the Threxil back into the freeze, and cripple their ability to adapt to Earth. But simple didn't mean easy. The enemy knew they were being watched. Patrols had doubled. Drones circled the skies like vultures, and the generator below was protected by energy turrets and thick alien armor. But it had one weakness. Its power core needed direct airflow, and if they could sneak in close and block it long enough, the buildup would cause an internal overload. Elena crouched beside Max and Kai, her most trusted fighters, and unrolled a frozen map over the snow. "Vec says the intake vent is on the north face," she said, pointing. "We move at night. No lights, no sounds. We plant the charges there and trigger a whiteout with snow bombs from the ridge. The steam and cold should blind the sensors just long enough to get close." Max frowned, his face pale beneath layers of scarves. "And if they see us?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Then we don't come back." That night, under a black sky without stars, the Ghost Wolves began the approach. Snow muffled their steps. The alien lights grew brighter as they moved closer, and now they could feel the heat rising from the generator even from a distance, the way it melted the frost under their boots and made the air feel thick and wrong. Vec led them through a narrow tunnel beneath a fallen ridge, his breathing slow, his alien eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "We have 10 minutes once the whiteout begins," he whispered. "After that, Their sensors recalibrate. Elena gave the signal. Small charges were set around the cliff edge, snow bombs made from packed powder and stolen alien energy cells. When triggered, they would explode upward, sending blinding white mist into the sky like an avalanche in reverse. The team split. Max and Kai flanked the vent, crawling low under sensor wires, while Elena moved with Vec to the base of the machine, its hum growing louder with every step. The signal came. 2 flashes of light. Elena hit the detonator. A thunderous boom cracked the night as snow erupted, covering the entire valley in a blizzard of ice and vapor. The sky turned white. Sensors blinked out. The ghost wolves ran. Max reached the intake first, pulling a charge from his pack and slamming it into place just as the wind screamed past. Kai covered him, firing at shadows that flickered in the snowstorm. Alien guards blinded by the sudden cold. Elena reached the core chamber and dropped her own pack of charges, sticking them to the metal with old magnets and frozen gloves, her breath coming hard and fast. Vex stood by the door, scanning with his alien eyes. "They're coming, you must go." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "You too." But Vex shook his head slowly. "I betrayed my people. Let me finish it." Then he stepped inside and slammed. The door shut. The moment the last charge was armed, Elena shouted into her radio, "Fall back! Now!" They ran through the storm, slipping, sliding, hearts pounding. Behind them the air crackled. A low rumble shook the ground. Then a blinding flash lit the night as the heat generator exploded from within, sending a shockwave of hot air that melted the snow for a second, and then froze instantly in the cold, creating a massive wall of ice that cracked and fell with a roar. Elena looked back, her chest tight. Vec was gone. But the machine was destroyed. And far above them, the great Threxil ship in orbit flickered with orange sparks as its connection to the ground severed. The ghost wolves limped back to the outpost by dawn, tired but alive, greeted by bursts of joy over the radio. Resistance cells across the globe had hit their targets too, using the same whiteout method. Threxil generators were destroyed in Norway, Kazakhstan, and Alaska. The aliens were retreating from the cold zones, pulling back into warmer cities, but the damage was done. Their momentum had broken. Elena sat by the fire that morning, bandaging a wound on her arm, listening to scattered voices on the radio. Whiteout worked, pulled back from northern base, casualties. But we held, and for the first time since the invasion, a strange feeling filled the bunker, something they barely remembered. It was not victory, not yet, but it was something close. The cold had turned the tide, and Earth, bruised but unbroken, was beginning to fight back. Elena Voss stared at the cracked radio unit in the corner of the bunker, its screen blinking with an odd signal, one that didn't match the usual Threxil broadcasts or resistance codes. It was a new frequency, one Vec had marked before he gave his life to stop the heat generator, and now, days after Operation Whiteout had shaken the alien hold across the frozen zones, it was suddenly active, repeating a simple message: "Request parley, location provided, no weapons." The words sent a chill down Elena's spine, colder than the snow outside. Diplomacy was not a word the Threxil had used before. Their invasion had been brutal, sudden, and arrogant, and they never asked. They demanded. So what had changed? Elena sat with Max and Kai at the long steel table as the wind howled against the walls, ice creeping through cracks in the windows. "It could be a trap," Max said, frowning. "Or maybe they want to buy time while they build something worse." But Kai shook his head, studying the repeating signal. "I don't think so. This sounds desperate." That word hung in the air. Desperate. The aliens had lost more than machines in the Whiteout campaign. They'd lost control. Entire cold regions were now dangerous zones for them, patrolled by humans who used snow and silence as their weapons. Drones froze in flight, and alien soldiers refused assignments in Arctic climates. Even their command structures seemed fractured, with strange signals and drops in coordination. Elena knew that sometimes even invaders bled. She made the call. The next morning, they would answer the signal. She, Max, and two others would go to the meeting point, a ruined hydroelectric dam 2 hours south, long abandoned and covered in ice, its broken towers standing like jagged teeth against the grey sky. They travelled by snowcat, engines covered, in frost, and their rifles hidden under packs. They would follow the message's terms but not trust blindly. As they approached the dam, the storm eased, and for the first time in weeks the sun peeked through the clouds like a pale eye watching from above. The meeting point was the old control tower at the center of the dam, now a shell of twisted steel and hanging icicles. And waiting there, standing alone beside a small field beacon, was a Threxel, not in armor, not armed, but wrapped in strange layers of heat shielding, its tall frame hunched and shaking slightly from the cold. Elena stepped out first, her breath hanging in the air, her heart thudding in her chest. The alien raised both hands slowly, palms forward. "I am Overseer de Wren," it said through a translator mounted to its neck, voice low and uneven. "I come without order. I come to talk." The others held their positions behind Elena as she stepped closer. "Talk about what?" she asked. The Threxil looked out over the frozen dam, its eyes dim and tired. "Surrender, not yours. Ours." Silence followed. Even the wind seemed to pause. Elena blinked. "You're saying you want peace?" De Wren nodded slowly. "We did not expect this. Your world, your winter, it is not just cold. It is hostile to us. Our leaders would not listen. They sent us to die in frost. Now many question. Some resist their orders. We are broken." The admission felt unreal, but the signs had been there. Glitches in the alien patrols, delay in responses, strange gaps in their attacks. The empire that had landed with fire and thunder was starting to splinter. Elena studied the alien carefully. "Why come to me?" De Wren hesitated, then tapped the translator. "Because of Vec. He told us before he died, you fight with purpose, not hate. Some of us believe the war can end, but others still hold power, and they will destroy everything before admitting defeat." A plan began to form in Elena's mind, not of battle, but of strategy. "What do you want from us?" she asked. De Wren glanced around, then lowered its voice. "A chance to speak to your leaders, not broadcast, not open, quiet, a hidden summit. Show them that we are not all the same. If we can stop the fighting from both sides, this war may not need to burn the whole planet." Elena returned to the outpost with a mind full of fire. The team debated all night. Some wanted to trap De Wren, others feared a trick, but Elena had made her decision. They would arrange the summit. Messages were sent out carefully, coded and cloaked, and within days 2 resistance leaders from other zones, Captain Saito from Japan and Commander Adira from Norway, arrived in the northern base, wrapped in frost-covered gear and carrying deep skepticism. When De Wren was brought in under watch, the tension in the room was so heavy it felt like ice pressed against the walls. But he spoke with honesty, explaining the fractures within Threxil Command, the desperation of the lower ranks, the silent rebellion brewing among units left to die in the snow. "Your winter is not just a storm," De Wren said. "It is a weapon we cannot fight, not with machines, not with pride." And as the humans listened, their hatred cooled, not forgotten, not forgiven, but cooled like steel waiting to be forged into something new. The summit lasted 2 days, hidden from the world, spoken in 3 languages and translated twice. And in the end, a decision was made. Small ceasefire zones would be tested, guarded by both sides. If they held, the truce would grow. If not, the war would return. Elena watched as Duren left the base under heavy snow, disappearing into the woods with a promise to return in 7 days. Whether it would be with peace or betrayal, no one knew. But as night fell over the bunker and the cold wrapped around them again like an old blanket, she felt something rare stirring inside. Something that had not lived since the day the sky first cracked open. A chance, not for victory, but for survival. Snow fell heavy and silent as Elena Voss stood on the ridge above the ceasefire zone, her rifle slung across her back and her eyes fixed on the shadowy tree line where the Threxial envoy was supposed to appear. And though the summit had ended with promises and cautious plans, every moment since had been steeped in worry and whispers, because peace, even the idea of it, had cracked open new dangers. 7 days had passed since Overseer Duren left the resistance outpost under a white flag, and 1,000 doubts. And now the entire North waited with breath held tight, watching the borders of the frozen zone where both sides had agreed not to fire, not to patrol, not to advance. But strange things had started happening. Drones went silent, Threxial supply ships vanished mid-air, and human scouts found weird burn marks deep in the ice, as if someone or something was moving between lines without permission. Some said it was rogue alien factions trying to sabotage the truce. Others feared it was Earth-based radicals who didn't want the war to end. But Elena feared something worse, that the Threxial High Command had learned of Duren's plan and was preparing to erase both the resistance and the rebels. In one clean sweep. The codename flashed across the resistance radio net 2 nights ago, Avalanche Protocol. It was buried in an old Threxial data core, cracked open by human hackers after Operation Whiteout, and it outlined something terrifying. A final plan to trigger controlled collapses of snow and ice across key mountain zones, designed to bury human outposts in a natural disaster so brutal it would look like nature's fury instead of alien revenge. The Threxial had built machines hidden in glacier crevices that could heat underground ice layers and cause entire valleys to fall in seconds. And now, Elena and her ghost wolves had one mission: find them before they were activated. She led her team into the southern ridge just before dawn. A dozen resistance fighters armed with climbing gear, frost-proof explosives, and a stolen alien sensor that still worked after a battery patch using old radio parts. The device pulsed slowly as they moved, pointing toward one of the suspected sites, a jagged glacier called Hollow Spine by the locals because it groaned in the night like something breathing deep inside. The ice beneath their boots creaked with every step. The wind so cold it made their faces feel numb despite their gear. As they moved deeper, the sensor beeped faster. Max, walking just behind Elena, tapped her shoulder. "It's under us, maybe 30 meters. Elena nodded and dropped to her knees, clearing away the snow with her gloves until metal glinted faintly in the dim light. They uncovered a hatch, smooth and round, like the top of a buried pod. It had no handle, no seams, just a faint glow at its center. "Vec showed me this once," Kai said, kneeling beside it. "Heat lock. If we can chill it fast enough, it'll pop." They set a frost bomb made from liquid nitrogen, scavenged from an old lab, and covered it with snow. A short countdown followed. When the device detonated with a soft hiss, the hatch cracked open with a sharp snap. Inside was a shaft leading down into blue light and metal walls, and as the cold poured in, they climbed carefully, weapons raised, hearts racing. The machine inside was worse than Elena expected. Huge curved rods, shaped like spider legs, stretched across the chamber, anchored into the ice, pulsing with slow orange light. In the center was a power node, humming faintly, and on the walls were frozen panels with symbols Elena didn't recognize, Threxial war codes. A timer blinked. It read 03:17:59, less than 4 hours until it triggered. They didn't have the tools to disable it safely, and if they destroyed it wrong, it might set off early. Elena called in the coordinates to command, her voice calm, but fast. "We need a strike drone here now. This site goes hot in under 4 hours." But the radio crackled with static, then a sharp voice broke through. "Commander Adira from the Norway zone. All units urgent. We intercepted a transmission. The aliens know. Avalanche protocol is active across all zones. 14 targets confirmed." A chill, worse than the wind, swept through the tunnel. Elena looked at her team. "We're not stopping one trap, we're stopping all of them." She made the decision fast. They would split. Half the team would climb back and guide in a strike drone to destroy the device. The rest, including Elena, would head west to the next suspected site. They moved fast, no time to rest, using snowbikes stolen from old Threxil scout posts. The ride through the storm was blinding and brutal, the ground shaking now and then, as far-off avalanches triggered early, echoing like bombs. As they neared the second site, something unexpected happened. A Threxil craft descended ahead of them. Not a warship, but a transport, white with a blue mark on the side. From it stepped Duren, hands raised again, breath steaming in the cold. "They know," he said quickly. "They want to blame you, make it look like your attacks triggered the avalanches. They will destroy you and use it as proof of your aggression." Eleanor didn't lower her weapon. "Then why are you here?" Duren looked her in the eyes, his own flickering with exhaustion. "Because if Avalanche Protocol succeeds, my people will never talk peace again. I brought codes, shut down sequences, but I need you to trust me." There was no time to debate. The second site was already warming, the snow under their feet thinning in patches. Duren led them to the hatch, entered a sequence, and it opened with a heavy sigh of steam. They raced down. The machine was smaller here, but already pulsing fast. Elena handed the codes to Max and covered the tunnel with her rifle. Outside, she could hear engines. Threxil soldiers approaching, likely those still loyal to the old command. The moment the device shut down, Max gave a thumbs up. "Got it!" But the soldiers were already firing from the ridge. Elena signaled retreat. They ran for the bikes as shots lit the snow, Duren taking a hit to the arm but staying upright. They escaped barely, snow exploding behind them as they crossed a frozen riverbed and vanished into the woods. 2 sites down, 12 to go. But now they had something more. Proof that the aliens were divided, that Avalanche Protocol was not universally supported. Back at base, Elena relayed the codes across the resistance network. Other teams began disabling devices. Duren remained, under guard, giving coordinates and shutdown instructions. And though the war still loomed like a shadow, something had shifted. The enemy was no longer one voice. It was many, some still cruel, but some now willing to talk. As Eleanor stood again, on the ridge the next day, watching the sun rise over the snowy world, she whispered to the sky, "Let the avalanche fall." But not on us, on them. Snow still covered most of the world, thick and endless, but something had changed as Elena Voss stood on the frozen ledge above what used to be the northern Threxil outpost, now just broken metal and ice buried deep. After the last failed activation of Avalanche Protocol, and though the war was not over, there was a strange stillness in the cold air, like even the sky was waiting to see what happened next. Because after months of silence, sabotage, and uneasy truces, the end was near, one way or another. Across the globe, the resistance had worked day and night to shut down the Threxil avalanche devices, each team risking their lives in frozen tunnels, snowy ravines, and enemy-infested valleys. Guided by Overseer Duren's codes and the flickering trust that had somehow survived long enough to matter, and now only one device remained, deep in the Arctic Circle, guarded by a last squad of Threxil loyalists who refused to surrender or listen to peace. That machine was different, larger, built into the heart of an old drilling station the aliens had taken months before the invasion even started, and it wasn't just a bomb or trap. It was designed to crack the ice shelf itself, sending sheets of frozen sea into collapse and drowning half of the northern hemisphere in water and storms. Elena had studied the schematics all night, her eyes red and tired, while outside the bunker, winds howled like ghosts, and even the fires seemed colder. And when dawn came with pale blue light and no warmth, she gathered her team for one last mission. Max, with his heavy rifle and sharp eyes, Kai, still limping from their last fight but refusing to stay behind, and Diren, who wore thicker thermal wraps now but stood straighter than before, like he had finally accepted that helping. Humans might cost him everything. They flew north in an old weather ship, repaired from scraps, moving low and fast across broken glaciers and through blizzards that swallowed sound and color. And as they neared the station, they saw the signs, Threxil beacons flashing red, towers still burning, and the ice cracked in long black lines across the sea. Elena didn't wait. She ordered a stealth drop half a mile from the site, landing hard in a snowfield lit only by the glow of the aurora far above. They crept forward, avoiding patrol drones and heat scanners, until they reached the outer wall, a ring of metal buried in snow, steaming slightly as underground machines warmed the ground for the final sequence. Inside, the station pulsed like a beating heart, machines humming with quiet menace, and Elena could feel time slipping away. They split into pairs, each group taking a sector of the station, and she and Diren moved toward the core, a chamber filled with spinning rods and gables that glowed faint blue. The control panel was old Threxil design, coded and locked, but Diren worked fast, fingers trembling from the cold. "They hardwired a bypass," he said quietly. "It cannot be shut down normally. I will need to reroute the signal. Freeze the coolant lines." Elena knew what that meant. Manual override from inside the core, exposed to radiation and heat, buried under the shell of the ice. "You'll die," she said flatly. And Diren looked at her, not with fear, but calm. So did Vec. He believed peace was worth a life. Now I understand why. But before she could speak again, alarms blared. Across the station, Max's voice crackling over comms. "We're under fire! South corridor breached! Threxil troops, 6 strong, armored." The moment cracked like ice under weight. Elena handed Diren her sidearm. "Finish the job. I'll buy you time." She raced through the tunnel, rifle in hand, her breath sharp in her throat, boots thudding on metal grates now slick with frost. At the southern corridor, Max and Kai were pinned behind a wall of fallen crates, return fire weak and slowing. The aliens advanced slowly, methodical and silent, their armor whirring. Elena slid beside them and threw a flash charge down the corridor. It exploded in a burst of white light and ice shards, giving just enough time to fire back. One alien fell. Another stumbled. The fight was brutal, loud in the narrow space, but the humans fought with desperation born from knowing. The world hung on the edge of collapse. Then, just as the last alien aimed a pulse rifle at Kai, a second shot rang out from behind them. Diren. He had returned, face pale, arm bleeding, but standing tall. "It is done," he said simply. "The core is freezing." The team hurried. Back to the control room, the floor shaking as the machinery groaned and shut down one layer at a time, lights flickering from blue to dark red, then black. The main terminal read one word: offline. Elena collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving, eyes wide. It was over. The final weapon had been stopped. Outside, the storm cleared just enough to show a sky filled with color, soft green and purple waves twisting in silence, and in that stillness, something deeper shifted. A signal flashed on the resistance radio. Not an order, not a warning. A message from the Threxil High Command. One word, spoken in 3 tongues: surrender. The long winter had not just broken their machines or their spirits. It had broken the illusion that Earth could be taken. Across the world, bases went quiet. Ships rose into orbit and stopped moving. Soldiers laid down arms. And for the first time since the sky cracked open, the people of Earth stood in the snow, without fear. Elena and her team returned to their outpost 3 days later, welcomed by silence and firelight, and though many had died and scars would remain, there was peace now, not perfect, not easy, but real. Zeren remained, no longer a prisoner, but a witness, his story told across both sides as proof that even in the coldest war, hope could survive. The ice still stretched far, but the thaw had begun. The long winter had ended, and in its place, the world waited to bloom again.